Hi, I'm Jay Scribner, and this is Real Hope. I'm excited to introduce to you today a dear special friend of ours that we have known for a number of years. And she has a very captivating story that she wants to share with us today. Her name is Sheila Artt. Sheila, thank you for joining us on Real Hope today. And we appreciate you and your husband and your ministry and the journey that you guys have been on and are still on. And I appreciate you joining us today and sharing this very personal story. Our listeners today will be captivated by the events that took place back in 1980,
right?
I think you said. And so thanks for joining us. And just pick it up at that point or relate to us what we need to hear about that event in your life.
Okay, thanks, Jay. Actually, I have a friend who wrote the story for me. She had interviewed me, and she called it "With a Knife at My Throat." So I'm going to introduce it by saying that because it kind of gives you a little bit of the impact of what happened. My husband and I have been pastors now for 45 years, and we were pastoring in central Louisiana back in 1980. 5 small children. My oldest daughter was 11, so I had an 11-year-old, a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 5-year-old. My life was pretty busy and pretty crazy, but we loved ministry. We had a Christian school. We had a lot of things going on in our ministry, and I was very active and involved with that. But we were owned a home. The church owned a home that we were remodeling, and on a Saturday afternoon, had been painting the house, some of the rooms, and to get ready for a new associate pastor that was moving in. And so I was in some old work clothes, an old T-shirt, and a turtleneck shirt actually, and some old jeans. And we got through, and it's Saturday, and Sunday's coming, and Mama's got to cook. We always had the big Sunday dinner, and I told my husband, go ahead and take the kids home and get them ready for bed, and I'm going to run to the store. And so it was about 6 o'clock or so, starting to get dusk because it was February or January at that time. And it was starting to get dark. And we drove at that time a big club van. And I took it to the grocery store about 2 blocks from the house. And while I'm in the store, unbeknownst to me, a man snuck into the back of my van. And while I'm in the store with the groceries, I come back, I get back in the van, just open the doors and put it on the passenger side, put the groceries in, behind the seat there, and never noticed that anyone's in there. He's hiding. And I drive the van toward my home, and there's a big curve just before you get to our house. And just before I got there, suddenly a man pops up behind me, reaches up, pulls down the rearview mirror, so he kind of stepped around and pulled down the rearview mirror, and then brought a 10-inch switchblade knife to my throat. He grabbed my shoulder. It was like holding.
You're still driving it?
I'm still driving, yeah. And he grabs my shoulder and presses it real tightly. And I didn't really quite understand that, but I realized later on that he could feel every time I wanted to move or anything. So he was putting me in a position where he could control everything. And he just stayed behind the captain's seat with a knife at my throat. And just as we got to my house, he said, keep driving. So he knew where I lived. I didn't realize that at the time, but later looking back on it, I thought just the timing of that. So I remember driving by my house and seeing the lights on in my house and thinking, my husband's going to be worried.
Has this man said anything to you at this point?
Just keep driving. Okay. As soon as the knife hit my throat, Jay, Holy Spirit just spoke to me and said, I will keep your mind in perfect peace if you are set upon me, because you trust me. And I thought, that's Isaiah 26:3, and I just said, Lord, I'm trusting you. I'm going to keep my focus on you. I'm not going to think about what's happening, because I do trust you. I know I can trust you. And so I continued to drive. I really had no options, He's holding me, the knife's at my throat, and I kept driving. But I am amazed, even to this day, how calm I was. because the Holy Spirit just came in and overshadowed any fear, just gave me this peace. It's a peace that passes understanding, we say often. And I kept driving. And I remember passing by a bank with our bank, our local bank, with the ATM, and I said to him, if you need money, I'll stop and get money. Whatever you need, that's what we do. We help people. So what do you need? I want to help you. And he just said, keep driving. He really didn't, there was not much conversation, not much said, but we passed a police car that evidently had stopped someone for a ticket, had the lights going. And I thought, my mind then, I'm thinking, well, maybe I could jump out. Maybe I could get his attention. He said, do not get his attention. So that's basically all he's saying. And then he's continuing to tell me to drive, turn here, turn there. And for probably about an hour, we drove around, went out to the countryside, we're still driving. And suddenly I realized we are in an area where there are no lights, no street lights, no lights at all. He made me turn down a country road. And I realized we had gone up by the gravel pit. So we're out by the gravel pit, and he makes me stop the car. Then he pulls me to the back and begins to disarrange my clothes, and he raped me. But as he was committing that act, honestly, this was the amazing thing about it. I never thought about using that word. I never thought of it as a rape. I just thought he was, in some way, I was almost separated from that. It was like it was happening to somebody else. And because I can tell you, for many years, in talking to women and ministering, even at that early age in my life, 30 years old, 31 years old.
You were 31?
31.
Was this man older or younger?
He was younger.
Okay.
But I didn't know. I really had no idea who he was. Really had not seen his face. I assumed maybe that he was younger, but I didn't really have any idea. But I remember saying at some point, they'd have to kill me before they'd rape me. Nobody's going to ever do that to me. Well, suddenly, it didn't matter, because I thought my 5 kids are more important than this. More important than him. I'm not giving up my life for this situation. But as I lay there on that floor and he began to approach me, I had a vision. For years I wouldn't use that word. I said something happened, but I know it was a vision that God gave me at that time. I saw so clearly Christ from the cross. I looked up and it was like I saw him on the cross. And when I saw him, I realized, and you've heard the old song, the ground is level at the foot of the cross. I've been saved since I was 7 years old. I was raised in a Christian home. I became a pastor's wife, and I've been playing the piano since I was 9 years old, playing the piano at the church. It was just like all a part of my life. And I knew I was saved. I knew Jesus. But that night, I realized that I was as guilty as a man who was threatening my life and was going to kill me.
Wow.
I saw the cross, I saw Jesus, and I saw at the foot of the cross 2 people standing there. This man who I didn't know anything about him, and myself. And it gave me so much peace. It gave me such a sense of the presence of God on my life that I wasn't even affected really by what he was saying, what he was doing, any threats. It didn't matter, because I knew who Christ was, and I knew that he loved him too. It's crazy.
Wow.
It's a crazy thing to experience when that's going on. So, after all that was done, and he allows me to kind of pull myself together, put my clothes back on and stuff. He says to me...
Are you saying anything to him?
Well, I was just praying out loud. But he said to me, do you think a man like me could ever be saved? And that's not a strange thing to say to someone
Really?
who just threatened their life and you've raped them. But you know what came out of my mouth? I'm telling you, it was not me, because I wouldn't have thought of that. He said, if he saved me, I know he can save you. As soon as I said that, Jay, this overwhelming power of forgiveness, it was like something just swept over me. And I didn't understand it. My husband didn't understand it. I couldn't. To this day, I can't explain how that happened, except that I had so much forgiveness. There was just this overwhelming forgiveness for him. And I thought, even in the midst of this, Holy Spirit ministered to me with that question. That question made me think of the truth of who I was and who he was.
Wow.
And so...
Are you thinking anything at this point that he's planning to kill you?
Well, I mean, he would make motions or overtures that he would kind of threaten me with a knife, and he's holding the knife at my throat the whole time. Now, I will go ahead and tell you this part of it. Later, when he was apprehended, which he was, he told the police he had planted and intended to kill me.
Wow.
So I know it was just God that preserved my life, But he had been stalking me. We'd noticed, we lived, in a major neighborhood, and we kept thinking there was somebody we'd see kind of a shadow in the backyard for weeks. And I'd said to my husband, I think there's somebody watching us at night. And he'd say, oh, we got kids walk through the neighborhood and stuff. And he said, oh, it's probably nothing to it. But the man said I was a targeted victim. He had chosen me. He and his wife had actually visited our church and knew who I was.
So he was married. He was
married, had a wife, pregnant wife. I found this out later. But the interesting thing was, after I said that, you know what he did? He pushed me out on the ground by my van and took my van and left me there.
So he left you there on the gravel pit road.
Yeah, right.
And he drove off with your van.
And guess where you left the van? Okay, let me finish that part of the story. He left me there, and I'm thinking, now what do? I don't know where I am. I don't know where anybody... I mean, it's a pretty remote area. I gathered myself, I kind of pulled myself together, put my clothes, and I start walking out to the road, and I'm thinking, I can't stop somebody. I can't tell them what just happened to me. I mean, it might be another guy that wants to hurt me, But as soon as I stepped out on the road, another car stopped, and the guy said, can I give you a lift? Are you okay? And I said, I'm not okay, but I don't know if I want to ride with you. And he said, well, there's a house right there. Let me just take you to the house. And he did. He took me to a house, and we could see the lights. It wasn't right there, but we could see the lights of that house. So he took me to the house and waited till I got to the door, and then the people answered the door. And when they opened the door, answered the door, they went, Miss Artt? Are you Miss Artt? And I said,
so the people that you had knocked on their door.
Right.
Okay.
I didn't know them, but they said, we have visited your church. We've been in your church. We know who you are. I'm thinking, oh, thank you, Lord, for something. It just gave me this peace. So I go inside, and they said, I'm trying to tell them what had happened. I still haven't said he raped me. I just said, he held a knife. I don't know how long I've been gone. I don't know how long. But I know my husband's panicking. But I said, my husband's at home with my 5 kids. And I said, I need to call him, and I need to call the police. But I think I'm going to call my neighbor first. And they went, you're going to do what? And I said, we have a couple in our church that live behind us, and he's a young ministerial student at Louisiana College. And they're really close, and I think my husband needs somebody to be there with him, with the kids. Because I said, I don't think he's going to handle this very well. And she said, okay. So I called Marky Milton Aiken, and they immediately went to the house. Then I called the police, and then I called my husband. Now that's a crazy, I'm thinking about, what was I thinking? The first person you call is your husband. But it was just such a twisted thing of events that I didn't really know how to handle it. So, but Marky Milder went and said, Sheila called and said that we need, and he goes, his first thing is like, have you heard from Sheila? I don't know where she is. I haven't heard from her. I don't know what happened to her. And they said, well, she'll be here shortly. So the police come, and they bring, as they're leaving the police substation, which is...
So the police came out to this house where you were?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And as they're leaving the substation, they happened to go by our church parking lot, and there was my van with the doors open, groceries still in it. The man took the van and parked it on the church lot, left the doors open, left the car running, and took off. So that gave them the first clue that it's someone who knew me,
Sure.
because he knew where to leave the van. But that, I always thought that was the strangest, thing that happened. So they come by, the police come out there and say, we need you to go to the hospital and be examined. And so we need you first to go by your house and get some change of clothes, because they'll want your clothing for evidence. So I went to the house, and there's my husband and 5 kids. Mark and Mills is still there. And the kids are like, all upset. Something's happened to Mommy, And we get in a circle that night, and I get down on my knees and just hug them up, and we prayed for that man.
Wow.
Now, how did we do that? It was like, I just knew that my husband's, being a husband and protective as he is, he was going to have such a hard time with this. So I said, baby, I don't know who the man is, but first of all, we'll pray that they catch him. And secondly, we'll pray this man gets saved. Didn't know a thing about him. And we did. And so I got my clothes, I left, and went to the hospital. And during the examination, the doctor was just making conversation. It's about midnight now. And he's making conversation and talking to me. And he said, well, this is kind of unusual for somebody to be able to tell me all, Well, I even told him that part about, that he asked me, could a man like me ever be saved? And I told him my response. Well, afterward, the doctor came back in the room, and he said, Miss Artt, he said, this is kind of unusual, but he said, my nurse that was in here with me would like to have a word with you. You don't mind? And I said, no, not at all. So she came in and said, Miss Artt, she said, I'm listening to what you said. And she said, I am just amazed that you're not angry. It's like, how could you tell a man that would just do that to you that he would be saved? She said, I'm a Christian, but I'm going through a very bitter divorce. And she said, I'm thinking, if she can forgive him, surely I can have some forgiveness in my heart. She said, I've been angry at God, I've been angry at my husband, I've been angry at my parents because they don't seem to understand what's going on. And she said, I've got to give up that anger. She said, I want you to know, tomorrow morning, I'm going to be in church. Because I've got to have whatever it is you have.
Wow, that's great.
And I remember my life verse. God reminded me, he said, Sheila, remember your life verse. Now, I didn't tell earlier, but I had cancer 6 times, and on the 6th time, I had a sentence of death. And God had miraculously healed me. But one of the things he taught me during the time and gave me a life verse was Philippians 1:12. I want you to know, brethren, and I often say sisters, brethren and sisters, that your circumstances, your experiences have turned out for the furtherance of the gospel. And I said, God, you're going to use this to touch lives. I know that my experience
And it even started with that nurse.
started that night.
Sure.
And that's what triggered that. I thought, this is not, the enemy's not going to get a victory in this. God's going to use this, and I'm going to use this for his honor and to glorify him. And I knew that from that night. And to tell you some of the things that happened after that night, or I don't know how much time we have, but it was a miraculous week and a half after that. We were at the police station all night that night. Now remember, this is Saturday night. We're pastors. We've got church to tend to the next morning. We never went to bed. We got home about 7 o'clock in the morning the next morning after being at the police station all night.
And your husband's been with you.
He's been with me. And I said, if we go to bed, because our services started at 9 o'clock, we were the church that wanted to have early services so we could get to the buffet before everybody else. I think Sunday school was at 9 and church worship started at 10. And so we just decided to stay up and go right into church. Now, again, I was a pianist, and we always had, the organist and I always had planned offertories, and I would practice. But that morning as we were worshiping, I just kept hearing in my mind Bill Gaither's song, Because He Lives, I Can Face Tomorrow. And I sent a message over to the organist and said, I want to play the offering this morning, just by myself. And even as I began, I remember starting down in the lower bass, Because He Lives. And as I sang that song, Well, first of all, the building was packed that morning. It was on the front page of all the newspapers in our area, a picture of my van and preacher's wife, no name, preacher's wife of 5 kids, kidnapped and raped, they didn't need a name. It was obviously me, And so the church is packed to capacity that morning. And
So this is the very next morning?
this is the same, within a 12-hour period, I'm already, basically, I guess he probably raped me at about 8:30, 9 o'clock, and at 9 o'clock the next morning, I'm in church.
And it's already on the head.
Oh, headlines on the Sunday morning newspaper.
Okay.
For the entire area. We were in Twin Cities in central Louisiana, and a pretty large area, and so it's front page news with our van on the paper. So, and plus the police scanners had it all over. People just knew, and they were all there. And as I began to play, Because He Lives, I could sense this release, this peace that came over that audience. And I was shaking, I was weeping, not because I was feeling sorry for myself, but because I knew I could face tomorrow. Now, Jay, when I say that, I thought the worst was over. But I found out the next 14 months actually were some of the worst times in my life.
Really?
The man held and kidnapped and raped me in 3 hours. But 14 months, our life was nearly hell because of the things we experienced. So when I was playing that thinking, well, I can face tomorrow because I've got through last night. But I didn't know I'd have to face so many other things. But it was just a miraculous thing that God's, what He did in my life and through our ministry during those days. Just to give you a few of the highlights. Well, as soon as I got through playing that morning, my husband said, Sheila, I really think you need to address the congregation today. So I stood before him, and I've never seen things like I saw that day. As I looked over the congregation that day, it was like I could see a finger touching lives all over that auditorium of people who had been abused and molested and hurt their life. And you've been a pastor for many years, so you will understand what I'm saying. I realized what we had done as a church was to discount some of the people that had the greatest testimony to minister to others because of something they had experienced.
Sure.
It changed my life forever.
Wow.
I said, I want you to know I'm okay.
So you shared the story.
I didn't tell them a lot of details. Just I know a lot. I understand a lot of you have already heard what happened. I was held at knife point last night and kidnapped and raped, but I'm going to be okay. It's really going to be okay. I'm the same person I was when I was here last week, and I'm not going to change because of this, except what God's done in me. And I said, thank you for your prayers. Thank you for your understanding. Thank you for being patient with us through this time. And when I walked away, I walked up to my husband sitting there on the podium and said, nothing will ever be the same in our life again. I know. And from that day forward, God worked such a work of grace in my life for other people that were hurting. Because, I was a perfect little Christian girl. I grew up at 7, knew the Lord. I played the piano. Miss Goody Two-Shoes, my husband said they used to call me in high school. I was chaplain of my high school. I prayed every morning over the intercom. I prayed every time we had an assembly. Everybody knew I was a Christian. But I'd never known what it meant to be a Christian like I did then.
Wow.
2 things. That God could love a man who would rape someone else, threaten their life, and that God loved those who we, the church, had rejected. And from that day forward, I don't know, it's almost as if I became a threat to some people. I didn't intend to. I didn't want it to be like that, but there was just so much God was doing in me. I'll tell you a few of the experiences we had just with the police department, because it's pretty unique situation. First of all, I told you that I realized the man had stepped around and pulled the knife to my throat, but I never saw his face. I couldn't tell you what he looked like. The police were going like, well, you must have seen him. And I said, no, basically, the only thing I saw was a shadow of who he was in the dark. And they said, well, can you give us any hint? And I said, I really can't. That was the night of the event. And they said, well, sometimes that happens. And I really thought it was even like, because I never saw his face, it was such a protection from God that I did keep seeing this face in front of me.
Sure.
But they called me one morning. It happened on Saturday night, and probably about Wednesday morning. They said, Miss Artt, can you give us any clue? We think we have a witness who saw him, but we have to connect what you know to what they've said. Can you give us some kind of clue? And they actually, it was really odd how they do it, because it happened at night. They called me about 10 o'clock at night and said, well, would you just come up to the police station? We want to work with you. There's a hypnotist. We brought a hypnotist from Baton Rouge, and he can help you release those thoughts and remember what it was. And I said, you know what? No one's going to hypnotize me. I said, I have the mind of Christ. And I said, he's going to remind me of what I need to know. So I really don't need your hypnotist. And they said, well, would you at least come up here? And I said, I'll do that. So my husband and I got in the van, and we started toward the police station. And he reached over and touched me like that. And he said, it's going to be all right. As soon as he did that, I saw that man's hand touch my shoulder and saw that hand come down. And until then, I'd forgotten it at that part. I saw hair that was long enough I saw the shadow of his hair touching his shoulders. I knew he had longer hair. And then I saw the hand, and there was a white insulated undershirt that he had, like, just that white insulated underwear.
Right.
And I saw his foot where it stepped over, and he had brown work boots on. That's on the way to the police station.
Yes.
I've just told him, I don't know. I still don't have anything, but I have the mind of Christ. When I need to know, he'll let me know. I'm so excited. I'm getting to the police station. I'm thinking, I can't wait to tell him. And they bring me into this group, and they're trying to do this thing. And I said, y'all can just stop talking. I told you before I got here tonight that God would remind him. And I told him what had just happened. My husband touched my shoulder. God brought to my remembrance, and I said, this is what I now remember. He had long hair. He had on a white insulated undershirt, and he had on brown work boots. They said, that's all we need. The man this witness saw had on blue jeans, a white long sleeve shirt, and long hair.
Wow.
And they said that's
And someone had a witness had seen him where?
At the grocery store. She said she had slumped down, and she said, I noticed this guy was looking around. And she said, he made me real uncomfortable, and I kind of slumped down, but I watched to see where he was going. And she said, I saw him walk behind a white van, and I didn't see him again after that. Mm-hmm. She said, whether he got in the van, I can't say, but I know that I saw this man walk toward that white van.
Mm-hmm.
She'd seen the car he got out of. She described the car. They'd already spotted him. They knew where he worked. And this is about 11, 12 o'clock at night, and they said, no worries, we'll pick him up when he gets to work in the morning. And that's exactly what they did. Wow. But they're just like, wow, And I'm just kind of having a good time with it, because God just kept showing up and doing these unusual things, And of course, they were blown away with the story of the forgiveness, and they're going like, well, why would you forgive somebody? And I said, I didn't. I couldn't have. I said, it was that vision God gave me. And I said, it changed my life. And the police, they got to where they just bring extra people in, like I'm doing this police show. It's kind of funny. And then they began to tell me different things about what they were going to do with the charges and all that. Well, as it turned out, he had kidnapped me in one parish, and he had raped me in another. He actually had me drive out far enough in the country that we got into another parish. And so the kidnapping case was being held by one parish. Louisiana has parishes rather than counties, if you don't know. And they connected me directly to the district attorney. Now, I didn't know all that was going on, but do you remember Dukes of Hazzard and Boss Hogg?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, this is the district attorney that I'm having to go before. Seriously. White suit, cigar, feet on the desk, the whole 9 yards. And he said, now, Miss Artt, I'm not sure we can prove this is a kidnapping. So we're going to reduce his charges. No options, no questions. This is what we're going to do. He's going to get attempted armed robbery. And he'll get a suspended sentence. And I said, I don't think that's fair. That's not what happened. But he said, well, we're not going to try this case. It's just not worth our effort. And that's what it's going to be. So I said, God, you're the righteous judge. You're the one. So I have to walk out of here and not argue. I'm not going to argue because you will make this right. You will justify what's right. So then I thought, after that, maybe it's just not worth fooling. Maybe I don't need to go to court. Maybe I just don't need to try to pursue this. Because unless I would cooperate, they had no case at all in the rape charge either. And he said to me, vengeance is mine, I will repay. I said, that's right, Lord, you'll take care of this. And he said, where did I say that? And I said, well, several places. He said, you might want to check that out. So I go over to Romans 12, where it says, vengeance is mine, I will repay, said the Lord. And he said, don't stop there and keep reading. Well, it's toward the end of chapter 12, and I keep reading. I get over to chapter 13. You know what chapter 13 is about? You know, but I'm not trying to pick up the spot. Romans 13 says, the law is written, not for those who obey the law, but for those who do not obey the law. I've never thought of it that way. He said, Sheila, this is not a law that he hasn't broken the law against you. Not only has he broken the law against you, I should say, but he has broken the law of the land. And because of who you are, you have been hand-chosen to represent me in that courtroom. And he said, there are many women who cannot go because they would destroy their life. But he said, you can go to court and you can follow through on this. And I want you to do it.
That's amazing. That is great.
I said, Lord, that's a big, big assignment. And he said, you could do this. Well, I didn't even understand all he was saying, but I knew he said, you are to go. Because he's broken the law. This is not for you, this is for all the women that have ever been kidnapped, raped. You're representing them in court today. So I went, we began to work on that, and interestingly enough, how things work, the DA was up for re-election in the other county, in the other parish, and it was a real convenient time for him to have a good rape case that he had a good handle on, to try it. So a week before the election, he waited 14 months until that to try the rape case. And all during that time, he's trying to get me in there to groom me and teach me what to say. And I said, don't tell me anything to say. I said, the Lord's already told me, don't worry about what to say in that hour. I will give you what to say. I will bring you before kings and judges, and you will know what to say in that hour. So I said, I don't have to rehearse this. And he said, we kind of need to go, because they might try to fool you. And I said, if somebody's telling the truth, you can't fool them. I said, I'm telling the truth. I'm telling the same thing that happened the night it happened, the way I told it, because it's the truth. So, and he said to my husband, you got to get your wife to cooperate with me. He said, she won't let me help her. I want to help her practice and rehearse. And Glenn said, I'm going to tell you something. If my wife said she heard from God, you better believe it. She heard from God. She's not going to listen to you. And the DA went, and just kind of shrugged his shoulders, you know. But things happened during those next 14 months that were very difficult. So we got to where we couldn't let our kids. We got hate letters. We got threats against our life. My husband we had to rearrange all the office there at the church and put a secretary that they had to go through to get to before they could get to his office, because people on the man's side that had been arrested was being held for the kidnap and rape. People that were defending him and putting together a legal defense kept trying to push their way into my husband's office to try to convince us that we were wrong, that we were unloving, we were unforgiving. And I kept saying, Glenn, we're not doing this because we're not loving. We're doing this because God said we had. And why else? Really foolish to do this if God hadn't said it.
Sure.
And so we went through that for 14 months. Literally, my kids, sometimes they'd pick up a phone call and hear words that were harsh and mean. So they couldn't answer the phone. And it just got where everything we did had to be filtered. And I went through a period of time after that where it was hard for me to go out in public by myself.
Now, is all this coming from the outside unbelieving world, or from the believing world, or both? Or
most of it was coming from within the church. I failed to mention the man who they apprehended was also a preacher's son.
wow,
And so his father's denomination and the churches of that area put together a large legal defense fund for him. I found out later. And they had hired the governor's law firm to be his defense attorneys. And they harassed us, they came against us, Christian organizations. This is a man who had a pretty long and lengthy record already. And but they wanted us to give him another chance. And we were as kind as we could be. We tried to be loving and kind, but I mean, we knew we had heard from God. And I know that's why God let me hear that, because
so did your church stand behind you?
in some ways.
That's probably another story.
Yeah, that's another story. We did have some controversy in the church because they felt like I was an embarrassment. I mean, we're talking a church with dignitaries in the community and, you know, important people that really didn't want to have to mess with somebody's personal issues, you know. So it was, I didn't get a lot of support. As a matter of fact, when I would go out in public, I got to where there was a young lady, a little younger than I, that lived across the street. And her kids had become friends with my kids, and they played together, played basketball together. And so one day I went over to her house. I said, Rhonda, would you come with me to the grocery store? And she said, what? I said, no, I mean, I just need somebody to go with me. I said, come have a cup of coffee and we'll go to the grocery store. It got to where she became my constant companion when I left the house. It was really a neat thing that God did, because one day Rhonda came over for coffee, and I'd run to the bathroom to finish my makeup, and she walked back down the hallway and was standing in the bathroom door talking to me while I'm getting ready, and she fell on the floor crying. And I said, look, I know I look really bad, you know, but I didn't mean to make you cry. And she said, no. She said, Sheila, you don't understand. She said, if you knew who I was, you wouldn't have me in your house. I said, I know who you are. You're Rhonda. You're my kid's friend's mother, and you're my friend because you're going with me to the store. And she said, at 14, my mother kicked me out of the house, and I lived on the streets as a prostitute until 18 years of age. She said, I'm not married to the man I'm living with, and I've never been married. My kids don't know who their dad is. And she said, and the man that I'm married to doesn't care for them. And I said, you know
There's a story like that in the Bible, isn't there?
Yeah. I said, Rhonda, you know what? This is such a setup. This is such a God thing. I said, God wants to save you, and He's connected us for your salvation. He doesn't care where you've been. I said, believe me, I found out what it means to be in that situation.
At the foot of the cross.
Yeah. So I said, let's just pray right now. She received Christ right there on my bathroom floor that day. I'm telling you, it was just the most amazing thing. God did orchestrate those things that I might lead her to Christ.
So at the end of 14 months,
Yeah.
what's the rest of that story?
We had a court hearing, our court trial there in the other parish, and the jury was selected. The DA still desperately trying to get me to come, rehearse with him, and I'm still saying, not gonna work, not gonna work. And so when I finally came to the final day when I'm to come to court, the defense attorney questioned me. She had no idea. They had it was really interesting. They used a woman, I think, to try to soften the blow. But her questions to me led to every part of my story that I wanted to tell about how I saw Christ on the cross. She had no idea what she was doing. It was so directed by the Lord, and there's no way you could have rehearsed that and given the right answers. But I completely gave the testimony of that night, how God preserved my life, how He asked me if He could be saved. And as I told that part of the story, the judge had tears that ran from his eyes, and so did some of the jurors got emotional about it. And as it turned out, they 100% voted for him to be convicted, which meant their sentence was 19 years in prison, no parole, no pardon, no suspension. But in less than a year, he was released.
And how was that? Why was that?
The ruling by the governor, now remember his law firm was the governor's law firm, but the governor's ruling was that the jury had been manipulated by the emotions of the judge. And so they released him scot-free in less than a year. And people say, well, doesn't that bother you? And I said, no, God is still a righteous judge. It doesn't matter what man does, but I know God's still a righteous judge and he does what's right. But the story was told, the front page of the paper carried my entire testimony, even about the cross, even about the salvation of the forgiveness of Christ.
Wow.
Time after time, I saw God use that to share and love the love of Christ. So we moved from there about a year later, and life has gone on. My kids are grown and gone, and
that's been what, 35 years?
Yeah, well, 35 years. Yeah.
And have you ever come face to face with that man?
No, I haven't. My husband did in the bathroom during the trial.
Okay.
Glenn earlier, while he was being held in the jail, had taken a Bible to him and witnessed to him. So he had met him. He'd gone in and met him face to face and taken a Bible to him. He had to do that. He really had to do that for himself. Because he had a very hard, he was even having a hard time at first understanding how I could forgive. But when he went, compassion crisis overtook him and gave him the ability to share Christ with him and give him that Bible. So that day in court, Glenn greeted him, and he came back and he was shaking. He said, I just saw him again, face to face. I said, it's okay. God's in control, and he's going to get glory out of this. And he absolutely has. It's been, Jay, I think I'll share this part just to conclude. God did such a work in me, and he never just has one person that's going to be impacted by a situation. Raising 5 kids, and 4 of them girls, and knowing that they had situations in life they'd be facing. I said, God, let this lesson be one that my girls learn from, that makes them healthy and strong in their relationship, that doesn't mar or scar. I don't want to be angry, because I've seen that happen, where people's anger and bitterness, because what Hebrews says, a root of bitterness defiles many.
Sure.
I didn't want my girl's life to be defiled by my bitterness and anger. And I'm so thankful for the forgiveness God gave me, that I could have a healthy understanding of God's love and forgiveness in the midst of that situation. And it's opened many doors of opportunity to minister the gospel, both to men and women. I began to say, not long after that, I think probably 40% of the church has been wounded in some way and some sexual misbehavior, and statistics now bear that out. But so many times in the church we have ignored that. And God's reaching out in his love and forgiveness for everyone.
In the church, it seems like we're really good about really finding that hole in the sand where we can put our head in it.
Exactly. Oh, absolutely.
And not deal with the real issues of life.
That's right.
And especially the person sitting next to you in the pew.
Yeah.
Only God knows really what they're going through and where they've been. There's been so many times that I've said it's amazing how so many hurts and heartaches come all dressed up in Sunday morning clothes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Sheila, you've told a story, a tragic story, and yet a story that by God's grace and mercy has and is ending up in victory.
Amen. Yes.
And you are amazing, and you and your husband are amazing with what you've been through and how you've reacted. There's so much about life has to do with reactions.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And it's amazing how you have reacted and how you and your husband
by the grace of God.
And you've told a story of forgiveness. And that's really what Christianity is all about. It's forgiveness, where each of us at the foot of the cross, a young mother being being raped, and the rapist and me and you all standing there at the foot of the cross. And it's all about forgiveness. God has worked in Sheila's heart from the very beginning to allow her to extend that forgiveness. But the reality is, that's what we each one need. The forgiveness of God for our own particular evil and wickedness and sinfulness. That's what we each needs. The forgiveness of God that is extended to you today. Well, Sheila, thank you.
Thank you, Jay.
Thanks for sharing your heart, sharing your story.
Amen.
And let me encourage you, no matter what your journey is, today would be a good day for you to find yourself at the foot of the cross.
Amen.
And receiving God's forgiveness. There is real hope for you.